Welcome to SysEng Quick. Today I'm going to show you how to install Hyperland on a fresh Arch Linux install under a Proxmox VM. Let's go create a new VM. I'm going to name it HyperArch. I will select the Arch Linux installer from January of 2024 that I've already added to my Proxmox server. I'll choose a graphics card of VirGL GPU, and I'm going to change the BIOS to be UEFI. I'll choose local ZFS for my EFI storage. Disk is fine, it's already on local ZFS and a storage size of 32 gigs. For CPUs, I'm going to choose 4. There are 6 cores in my Proxmox server, so that should be fine. Under memory, I'm going to change it to 8 gigs. I've got 32 in the Proxmox server. Network is fine like it is. It's bridged to my network, and it's selected as VirtIO. I'm going to go ahead and select Start After Created and click Finish. Once the virtual machine has been started, let's select it from the menu and drop down the console and select Spice. It will download the file, and then I will open that file. In the console, you can see that it has not actually booted. This is because Proxmox enables Secure Boot by default. Let's go ahead and change that. We'll go set a Control Delete, and when it reboots, press Escape to get in the menu. Go down to Device Manager, Secure Boot Config, Attempt Secure Boot. Let's toggle that. And now I will hit Escape to go back to the main menu and select Reset. Now we've got into the grub menu. We can hit Enter to go boot the Arch Linux installer, or wait for the timeout. Now that we are at our root prompt, we can install Arch Linux. Before we proceed, I forgot to add an audio device to this virtual machine. Let's do that now. I'll select the VM from the drop-down, go to the Hardware tab, click the Add menu, add audio device. ICH9 Intel HDA is fine. Backend driver Spice is what I want. Click on Add, and then we can start the virtual machine again. Before we begin, let's verify that I have internet connectivity. I have an IP address, and I can ping google.com. That looks good to me. Let's start the Arch installer. The language defaults to English. That works for me. Under Mirrors, I'm going to select Mirror Region, and I'm going to search for United States, and I'll press Enter to select that. We'll go back. The locales default to US keyboard layout, English US for locale, and UTF-8 for the encoding. That works for me. I'll leave them like they are. Disk configuration, we're going to use a best effort default layout with my new QEMU hard disk. We're going to use Btrfs, and yes, I will leave it with the default structure and subvolumes and enable compression. I'm not going to enable disk encryption on this. Bootloader doesn't matter to me, honestly. Grub and systemd are both fine. I don't know what unified kernel images mean, so we're going to leave that at the default. I will disable swap, and I'll change my host name to HyperArch. I'm not going to set a root password. We're just going to have a user account with sudo. Let's add a user. I'm going to call it Proxmox, and I'll pick a super secure password that it definitely likes. And yes, I'll say it should be a super user. Let's go down to Confirm and Exit. For Profile, I'm going to select Type, Minimal. And let's go back. I'm not going to install an audio server from the installer. We'll do that later. I'm going to leave kernels at Linux. Additional packages, I am going to add Git to that list. Everything else is going to be fine. Network configuration, I'm going to use Network Manager. For my time zone, I am close to Indianapolis, so let's say that. And I'll leave automatic time sync with NTP on. Optional repos, I don't plan to change. Let's go ahead and select Install. It will give us the install configuration, and I'm going to go ahead and press Enter. Now that the install is complete, I'm going to go ahead and say, no, I don't want to chroot into the newly created install. And we're going to go ahead and reboot into our new Arch Linux install. Next, I want to install my AUR helper. I prefer Yay, so let's install that. I'm going to do a git clone https aur.archlinux.org/yay.git. After we've cloned that, we'll go into the Yay directory, and I'll run make package-si. It's going to ask me to confirm I want to install Go. We need this to build Yay. And now that's installed Go, we can say yes to install Yay. Let's run yay -- version, and you can see we do have Yay installed. Let's install a command line editor. I'm going to do yay -S vim. If you prefer a different editor, like Emacs, NeoVim, or Nano, select that instead. Now that it's installed, I want to make Vim my default editor. Let's do export editor, all caps, equals Vim. And to persist this setting, we're going to do sudo edit etc profile.d editor.sh. We'll add the same line, export editor equals Vim, to this file, and save the file. Next, I want to make a few tweaks to the sudo configuration. I'm going to do sudo -E vi sudo. We'll scroll down to the default specification section. I want to uncomment this line here. And I want to add a new line under it saying defaults and keep plus equals editor. This will keep my editor variable when I do vi sudo. Next, we're going to scroll down to the bottom and uncomment this line that allows members of group wheel to execute any command. Finally, I want to make a few sudo commands that my Proxmox user can run without any password. So let's do proxmox all equals all : all, no password, and then user bin pacman for package management, user bin power off to turn the system off, and user bin reboot. There's one more thing we have to do after we say the password, which is remove the file that Arch install created to allow our Proxmox user to run sudo commands. So sudo rm-f etc sudoers-d 00_proxmox. This would follow your username if you didn't name yours Proxmox. I think we're ready to install Hyperland. Let's do yay -S Hyperland xgg desktop portal Hyperland dunst, and we need to pick an application launcher and a graphical terminal. I'm going to use Wofi, which is the default in Hyperland, and I'm going to use Foot for my terminal because I'm more familiar with it than Kitty or Alacrity, although they are fine choices as well. We'll go ahead and proceed with the installation. We will be adding additional packages later, but I intend to build up this Hyperland installation piece by piece. This is about the minimal number of packages you'd need to install to get Hyperland working. Once Hyperland has been installed, we can launch it by typing H Hyperland. Once Hyperland starts up, it's going to give us a warning that we're using an auto-generated config file. We could use super Q to launch Kitty, except we don't have Kitty installed, so we can't do that, or super M to exit Hyperland. Let's go ahead and do super R to bring up Wofi, and then we'll launch Foot. Let's press enter a few times to bring the cursor away from that warning banner. And let's use Vim to edit our Hyperland configuration. Vim ~/.config hyperland.conf. We will go ahead and comment out this auto-generated line. The monitor we're going to change from preferred to be 1080p. So I'm going to say 1920 by 1080. We're going to change our default terminal to Foot. And for now, I believe that is all we're going to need to do. So let's go ahead and save this file. You can see that it reconfigures our monitor immediately. This is because Hyperland reloads its configuration as soon as you save it. Let's install a graphical greeter so we don't have to log into the console anymore. We'll do yay -S SDDM. It's going to ask us which provider you want to use for your true type fonts. Honestly, they're all the same to me. If you have a preference, pick that. I want to go with TTF Deja Vu. But again, they're all about the same as far as I'm concerned. Once SDDM is installed, we need to enable it to run on boot. We'll do sudo systemctl enable SDDM, and then let's do sudo reboot and show it working on boot. And there we go. We have our SDDM session. It's got my Proxmox user, and at the top left, my session of Hyperland. Let's go ahead and enter my password, and we'll log in to Hyperland. Go ahead and make this full screen, and there we are, back in Hyperland. Let's tweak some of the Hyperland configuration settings. I'm going to launch a terminal with super Q. We'll do vim /.config hyperland.conf. We've made changes to this file before, for instance, changing the default terminal from kitty to foot. I'm going to replace Dolphin with Thunar for the default file manager, which is my preference. If you prefer Dolphin, leave that. We haven't installed either of them just yet. Let's scroll down a bit. We'll see the general section. The default gap configuration is a bit heavy for my liking. I'm going to change that to 10 for the outer gaps. The inner gaps are fine. In the decoration section, they have the setting for rounded corners. I like the rounded corners, but I feel they're a bit too pronounced by default. I'm going to set them to 5. This will help my editor not be so cut off on the first line. In the next section, under animations, I'm going to make a controversial change and set them to be disabled. I know a big part of Hyperland is the animations, but they're simply not my thing. If you like them, leave them enabled. Scrolling down a bit, under miscellaneous, we have force default wallpaper. I actually don't care for the animate wallpapers, so I'm going to set that to be 0. If you like them, leave them as they are. Towards the bottom, you'll see the configuration for the key bindings. I prefer Alt as the main modifier over the super key, so I'll change that. I'm more familiar with i3 and Sway default key bindings, so I'm going to make a few tweaks to the bindings in Hyperland. For instance, rather than using mod Q to launch my terminal, I use mod return. Killing an active window, that's what I'll use mod Q for. For exit, it should be mod shift E. So I'm going to add the shift modifier on the left of the comma. This is how we get 2 modifiers. The menu, I want to change to mod D. Everything else should be fine. Let's go ahead and save this. And remember that Hyperland reloads your configuration whenever you save it. So we'll see the change in gaps and the rounded corners immediately. So you can see the first line is not quite so cut off by the rounded corners in the editor, and our gaps are less than they were before. Since we have enabled Thunar as our default file manager, let's go ahead and install that. I'll do yay-s Thunar, and we will say yes to proceed with installation. Once Thunar is installed, I can do Alt-E to bring up Thunar. Let's configure our audio server, Pipewire. I'm going to open a terminal with Alt-Enter, or if you didn't change that key binding, super Q. I'll type yay-S Pipewire-open curly brace, ALSA, Jack, Pulse, close curly brace, and then we want GST plugin Pipewire. And let's add a volume mixer as well. We'll do PA-VU control and PA mixer. Let's go ahead and say yes, we want to proceed with the installation. Once it is complete, it will set up WirePlumber as our Pipewire session manager. Let's go ahead and reboot. That will get everything in the right state, and we should be able to get output from Pulse Audio. Let's go ahead and hit Alt-D to bring up the launcher, or if you didn't change that keybind, Super R, and I'll look for Pulse Audio Volume Control. There we go. I've got my audio device. It's got speakers. It is very quiet for me, but I believe it is being heard. It's a little bit hit or miss, but this has always been a little bit hit or miss for this. Okay, we have audio working. The next thing to configure is our application bar. Let's install Waybar with yay-S Waybar, and I'm also going to install Network Manager Applet. We'll say yes to proceed with the installation, and once Waybar has been installed, we will type Waybar at the prompt and hit enter. There are a few problems with the default configuration. The icons are definitely wrong. We have some Sway modules we can't use because we're in Hyperland, not Sway. We have some modules we can't use because it's a virtual machine, temperature, backlight, batteries. And we have a problem with the not being able to open the dev input devices or being unable to connect to MPD. Let's fix these problems. I'm going to hit Control-C to quit Waybar. Let's copy the configurations from the default location to a location in our home directory so we can edit this. I'm going to do cp-r etc xtg Waybar ~/.config. Now I can edit the Waybar configs in my local directory. vim ~.config Waybar config. There are a few things we should probably change here. The first one being this line here that's commented out. I do want the Waybar at the top layer. If it's not, you may find that your tray applets do not display their menus on top of your windows, but rather behind them, so you can't click on them. Make sure this is uncommented to prevent that. Under Modules left, you can see it says a lot of things about Sway. Well, we don't have Sway, so most of those can go away. Sway Mode, Sway Scratchpad, also Custom Media. I don't need that either. There is a Workspaces module, but it's not from Sway, it's from Hyperland. Same thing for Sway Window. Let's replace that with Hyperland Window. Under Modules right, I'm going to get rid of MPD. I don't use media on here, and I don't need that running. Everything else here is mostly okay, although since I don't have a temperature sensor in this VM, I can go ahead and get rid of that. Same thing for the backlight. Same thing for Sway language. There is a Hyperland language switcher, but since I don't use that, I'm not going to add it to Waybar. I don't have a battery or a second battery in this virtual machine. Everything else should be okay. Let's go ahead and save this file. And then let's go see about those dev input problems. If we look in dev input, you'll see that everything is only read-write for root and the input group. But we are not part of the input group. We could fix that by making us part of the input group. So I'll do sudo gpasswd -a $open paren id-un close paren input. This will put your current user into the input group. Now, if we want to switch to the group, we can do new group input. Although, next time we log in, we'll be in that group automatically. This is just temporary, so we don't have to log out and log back in. Now that I've fixed that, the last problem to fix is the fonts. I believe it needs Font Awesome for the icons it's using. You could probably change those Unicode glyphs to something else, but I don't know. It's probably fine. And there may be other fonts that would satisfy those emojis, like possibly Noto emoji, but I'm not sure. They recommend Font Awesome. That works for me. So let's do yay, and we'll search for Font-Awesome. I don't remember if it needs the OTF or TTF versions. They might be the same, but we'll just install 1 and 2. And we'll say yes to that. And finally, let's relaunch Waybar. And we'll do it in the background. It is no longer giving us any problems with MPD. It's not complaining about input or any modules that we can't use. We have our icons there. We have our workspaces. I can switch from 1 to 2 to 3. We have our window title. Everything looks pretty good. One more thing we should do is make sure Waybar starts whenever Hyperland does. To do that, let's open our Hyperland configuration. vim tilde.config hyperland.conf. Towards the top of the file, you can see this line that says exec once. That's the thing we want to add. Let's do an exec once equals Waybar. Now we'll go ahead and save this file. And let's go ahead and quit Hyperland and see if that worked. I'll do Alt-Shift-E, or if you didn't change that keybind, Super-M. We'll log back in. And does Waybar start? Yes, it does. That covers everything I would consider essential for a working Hyperland installation. However, there are obviously more packages you may wish to install for a more complete experience. First and foremost is going to be some kind of web browser. You can install Chromium or Firefox or Google Chrome or whatever you want for that. I'll install Chromium. I usually prefer Firefox, but I thought of Chromium first for some reason. If you want to control the wallpaper on your desktop, I recommend an application called Hyperpaper. It is in the repos. Simply do yay-s Hyperpaper. I don't have any to show off right now, but it's very configurable. If you want to take screenshots, Hypershot is a great tool to do that with. I'm not sure why it thinks I built this already, but we'll just say rebuild it, please. And we'll proceed with the installation. For some reason, Grimshot did not work for me on Hyperland, but Hypershot did, so I switched over to using that. Although in the past, Grimshot has been very good. And Hypershot, as far as I can tell, is just a front end for Grim, which is all Grimshot is doing as well. But for some reason, this worked better for me. We can do Hypershot-M, tell it region, and I will say, select all this region here. We'll get our screenshot, and it's saved automatically to home Proxmox. We can configure that if you look up the manual page, or do Hypershot-help. One thing you'll definitely want is a policy kit manager, such as PolKit GNOME. Let's go ahead and install that. Yay-s polkit-gnome. This will enable you to bring up dialogues when an application requests elevated permissions that can work within PolicyKit framework, such as Virt Manager. You need to make sure this is enabled when you start Hyperland. It's another line of exec once in your config. You can find the binary in user lib polkit gnome authentication agent. Let's go ahead and copy that long binary name, and then we'll do vim tilde/config hyperland.conf. Let's say exec-once equals, and we will copy that path in there. We also forgot to enable our Network Manager applet when we installed Waybar. Let's go ahead and do that. Exec-once equals nm-applet, if I can type. We'll save that. And for now, we'll simply launch it from the command line. And there we go. We have Network Manager running in our tray now. If you have Bluetooth devices, you'll want to install things like BlueZ, BlueZ Tools, and BlueMan. And then there's a BlueMan tray application you can put in Waybar. If you want to control your XFCE and GTK themes, you may wish to install things such as LX Appearance or XFCE4 settings. Very useful tools for configuring the way your GTK and XFCE apps work. Something that may be important is to install Qt5 Wayland. This will provide you a better integrated experience with Qt5 apps on Wayland. Some things may not even work if you don't have that installed. I believe that Zoom screen sharing does need Qt5 Wayland to work, although I've had very bad luck on the Zoom desktop app for screen sharing. If you are in a virtual machine, you're going to want to install things such as QEMU Guest Agent. And you can install the Spice VD agent, although I haven't been able to get the VD agent to do my clipboard sharing in Hyperland. I believe it is not compatible with the Wayland clipboard, but it does work in GNOME and KDE because they have clipboard hacks that make that work in Wayland. But as far as I can tell, Hyperland does not have anything that works with that. If you know how to get clipboard sharing working inside a virtual machine under QEMU, I would love to know about that. And that's everything I wanted to cover in this tutorial on setting up Hyperland in Arch Linux. I hope it has been helpful. If so, hit those like and subscribe buttons. Thanks for watching.